Hello again, Happy New Year. My last video I noticed was on December 27th. I was talking about, are you sure? Which is interesting because the previous video I was talking about rewilding and mendicancy. As you can see, my brain struggling with these two concepts that are trying to merge, but then realizing how they may not be actually coexisting in some ways. And I don't know if I have the background for something like rewilding, even if you take it to the extreme. But anyway, so you just see how the contemplation leads me to different spaces. But I was just rewatching a video about Are You Sure, which is basically me questioning my 10 years of being this kind of free agent, Suelo inspired, simple living guy. And versus some kind of joining some kind of order, official thing, which at this point, the only one on my radar. I really think the only one out there that even makes sense because I've aged out of a few, and the other ones are probably overseas, or they're too like traditional or rigid or whatever. Is the Plum Village tradition, because it's an interesting hybrid, you know. And yeah, that's what I talked about, for almost an hour in my last video. But I think more specifically, since I made that, I've been thinking more, and I've also been in contact with him to go back and begin a work trade process and take a little bit slower route to it. Like the thing is, with when you go to the rains retreat, and especially if it's your first time, you only have like 2 months, and then you have to pretty much commit to the aspirancy. And I didn't even make it 2 months. I called it after a few weeks. I was just like, I'm not feeling it, and like I said, I think it was a little premature. And also the fact that it's not like the easiest thing to get down into. Like, it's a little funky. It's also because I'm not living like in San Diego or something, or LA. I'm my home base has been up there in the Northwest, so it's it's a pretty good 1,000 miles away. Is a long hitchhike, even though it's only like a $150 plane ticket. But at any rate, it's like a little hard to sort of maintain contact with monastics because they're busy. They're like overloaded. There's kind of like they're not like on their phones, 24/7. So it's a little funky. And then even some of the lay community too, like the people that I was on retreat with. I am in contact with a few of these folks, but like it's a little harder to maintain some of those connections because also it's only 3 months too, so it's not like a super long time. But I think what this video is going to be more about is this whole notion of like, there's my Deer Park app, the bell. But this notion of like throwing in the towel, kind of, which is part of what I talked about in the last video, but going deeper on that concept in terms of like, this model that I've been using that's been working okay, but obviously breaks down in isolation. And I've been using this analogy too, which is very fitting, where it's like the rug was pulled out from under me when I became isolated in Corvallis with the pandemic, and and then coming back from Deer Park and hard and 1 foot out the door and not able to really get any traction. And part of it is like when you're depleted and you're kind of out of it, you don't have much to give, which is a bigger problem than I even realized. And it wasn't such a big deal in Portland because I was usually like generally supported, nourished, and everything else, you know. But because of my simplicity practice too, I could have the luxury of hiding out more if I wanted to for self-care or just avoidance of drama. And I started, pulling back a little bit there in the last couple of years, partly because there was some community strife that was making it like uncomfortable to operate. And that really clouded a bunch of us actually that were living there. And it was a hard thing to kind of rectify because it involved people that weren't willing to come together and have reconciliation and things, and but so that kind of started that process of being a little iced out, a little, there's some trauma wounding there, and like a little skittish, you little turtle up. And then that carried through into 2018, 2019, then boom, pandemic hit. And it was like, oh boy. Oh boy. Nobody's doing anything. And so I've been out of that as like me as a entity of giving and receiving. And so if you're kind of out of it and not really able to give, you're not just going to volunteer at any old places, especially spots that are like more challenging and more arduous, like, helping with houseless here in town or something indirectly. It's like, I did a bunch of that in Portland because I was more solid and younger too. But even that was rough, just being around that energy and like these folks that are like hungry ghosts and they're struggling, and you kind of burn out. And there is like a kind of a giving burnout that happens too. And you can even, it's like for me being here, it's like I didn't need to, because my part of my strategy was like, okay, so I don't really work, I volunteer full time. Like my usual inroads to back to communities through volunteering and stuff. So, but oftentimes, the volunteering opportunities aren't like the most easeful sometimes or nourishing, which is why I found myself when I was kind of ramping back up this summer, I was going to spiritual centers again. It's like I'm not being asked a whole lot here. We're not trying to tear down the system. I'm just here for community and good vibes and spiritual connection, and there was a few little connections made, but then my uncle moved in and it really threw a wrench in that whole thing. Thankfully, he's been away, so I'm finally coming back to I can do whatever I want again. That was a tough time. Tough 4 months. But then, but that's part of my thing that's been broken, is because my isolation is caused from lack of plugging in. And I was even thinking about this the other day. It's like, if I were like a monastic, you can't really hide, which is also one reason why people probably disrobe, because you're always on. I mean, you have moments where you can have some downtime, and you have even you go on little trips with your sangha, and it's like not such like a big deal, and there's lazy days and things, but you're still on in terms of service. It's a full-time embodied gig. You can't go for go to Barbados for a month just on your lonesome. But part of it is it's designed though to be self-nourishing, right? So it works as far as I can tell. Because in giving in that supportive container, you're able to be self-sustainable, like the engine in Snowpiercer. It just runs and runs and runs on the good vibes, on the Dharma engine. And that's how it goes. I think it's another reason why a lot of people in the activist community burn out, or really burn out, and then they have to totally stop because they may not have the practices or nourishing container to really deal with these hard things of living in this world. And so, yeah, there's this roller coaster pattern for the more the activists, maybe even some intentional communities and even like especially activist housing communities, where famously, if you're like an activist house, it's like you're just like a powder cake, because you have all these folks that are in there that are charged up, fired up, and they're angry. And they may have some spiritual practice that keeps them grounded, but a lot of times they won't, or one or two won't have. We'd be very skillful about it, and we'll disrupt the whole vibe. Which is another reason why I was grateful that I was in my house for 5 years. At the homestead. I mean, it's right there in the title, homestead. It implies a spiritual grounding, and it was. People were pretty skillful, and it was pretty smooth. And so I just hung on for dear life and wrote it out. So I got a good 5 years out of it. But part of that is it's also like when you're just trying to ride something out and just get to the end point, it's not so great. Like, I'm just trying to make it until I die at age 75 or whatever. That's not a really, that's kind of a skittish way to show up to the world. But it's tricky, especially with how I've been living. That's one reason why I wasn't traveling a bunch either, because I was like, this is pretty unique. This is like my little monastery bubble. I'm just gonna stay here in the comfort zone. And that's what happened. So yeah, the isolation and paralysis has been tough. One of the toughest challenges I've faced, because, and this goes back to my analogy of that rug being pulled out, because it's sort of like, so what I have been attempting to do, and have been doing for 10 years, this like free agent, simple living mendicancy thing. When you lose all that, it's like losing the net, and I'm like a trapeze artist, right? That's really a good analogy, because I'm tackling some pretty big things here, like hardly using any money, wholesome practices, substance free, veganism even, which I'm getting back into because it's like the right thing to do. All these things can kind of isolate you and make it a little more arduous, as opposed to like you're going with the flow of most of the people around you. And so it is sort of like this high wire act. And the really challenging thing is when you don't have your safety net there, it's you can't really do it. You really can't operate smoothly. It's like I can't go out and volunteer, and I can't do this, and that really fully, because I don't have a nourishing safety net support system anymore, and I haven't had that. It's just like, so that was, and of course I've known this in Corvallis. That's the reason why I've been trying to leave, because it's like, if I'm not going to plug in here and put the safety net back so I can actually do this thing, then I just shouldn't even start. It's like cart in front of the horse thing, right? It just doesn't work. And that was part of my stubbornly trying to, like, my habit energy of like, well, this is what I know how to do, and this is how I know how to do it, but it doesn't really work anymore because of all these reasons. So I've been hitting a bit of a wall, and maybe was hitting some of that wall in Portland even, I think, in the last couple of years. Because really, I think when I stopped practicing with touching or Sangha, you can start to see things get a little funkier. I've talked about this before, I think, in my Mendicancy video, where it's like I started getting more into like video games and like just more worldly stuff and less spiritually focused. And like I was even spending money on games, which I had, like, my golden rule is never to ever even spend money if I absolutely didn't have to. So like, Um, but yeah, but this thing though, this notion of without a net, without a wire, is very true. Where it's like, what's the thing in the Hollywood movies where they operate without the safety harness? You know, I'm not Tom Cruise or whatever. Tom Cruise though, he does have all the apparatus because he's worth millions, but he does his own stunts, and I do my own stunts too. But it's just a funny thing because like, yeah, it's not there. And like, I mean, whatever net I have, it's sort of cobbled together from like friends that I still have from various places. So there's like some sense that they're rallying behind me in some capacity, but they're also not physically around me, so it only goes so far. And then my poor dad, God bless him, he's pretty mainstream. He doesn't get half the stuff I'm even talking about. So if there's even a net there, it's like there's full of holes in it. I haven't been fully seen and heard in a long time with him. It probably never will be, really, because we just come from different worlds. So that's why there's this like desperate urge to get back to that, because I've just been out of that element for so long. And even just like, I'll probably pop up to Portland for a week or two just to kind of get a little sense of that again. Because it's just weird. It's like a weird, because it's like I thought I was doing some holy mission, and yet where is the easefulness? That's what's been actually very interesting too. Because I thought I was doing something, and I even got like into the believing in God and like Christ and all this in the last year. But it's not very strong, and I'm very doubtful even. It's like, who's ruling down here? There's this whole concept of like mammon or whatever, the unseen realm, the devil, the Satan or whatever you want to believe in, that is like ruling on the earthly plane, and the Almighty only has so much influence or something. I don't know, but honestly, like the way things go a lot of times, it's kind of suspect, because there's a lot of messed up things that go on a daily basis, and some like pure evil and some pure suffering and things that are just rough. And it's like, where is God? Why don't you show up more? Like, what's going on here? You just giving us so much free will that it really is, that's what it is. It's just choose your own adventure, and it can be all over the place. But I don't know. I don't know. Because back in Portland, there were more signs that I'm like doing the right thing, and I'm being supported, and I'm being rewarded, and synchronicities and things, and so obviously I see a lot of this from pure isolation. I can't tap into that if I'm just like not plugging in. I mean, even a small case of synchronicity here is like, the roadside moon free pantry is a really great resource, and it's like there's simpatico-ness with our life missions, and I drop off stuff there, and I chat with the owner and hang out and stuff. And that's like a good kind of Portland vibe thing. And so that's the kind of thing that would happen in Portland all the time. And I only have a little dose of that here, just to kind of keep me afloat. But it's been so hard. Here's that bell. It's been so hard. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some part of the story here, and I'll look back to it like it had to be hard enough for me to give up or something. Because if it was sort of smoothly operating in some capacity, I wouldn't notice that, oh man, this is actually kind of arduous, and I'm operating without a net, and, it doesn't really work. But anyway, getting back to what I kind of want to talk about for the most part is that as I ramp up to get back into a nourishing, net-forming community, is, like I'm still torn on like the garden and traveler mode, whatever, which is basically a continuation of what I've been doing, which is, been okay, but it's like it's a whole deal that I'm doubtful on. I'm doubtful if I have the makeup for it and the know-how and the given my age, and I'm not like I'm super like strong in body even right now. Like I'm overweight and pretty sedentary, and so like a lot of that, you have to be pretty hardy and nimble. And I'm still ish, I'm still hardy and nimble ish, but it's hard to like get that gusto to do it. And I think even like if I was in my 30s and somebody was telling me about the garden or something, or even Sadhana Forest, which is another like kind of traveler community in India. And in fact, I had this opportunity years back where somebody was going to pay for my ticket out there to go to Sadhana Forest. So that's like these missed opportunities, I think. But it is what it is. So, but yeah, it's this notion that I think the core of this video is this. I'll probably title it something like, it's like a almost like it's a fork in the road still here, where I think I had started that even when I was at Deer Park, where it started this little off ramp to go down ordination, right? Now, let's just call this video like ordination versus free agency, right? Because that's kind of what I'm at the crossroads here, and there's a lot of pressure too, and that's one reason why I think when I was at Deer Park, I pulled out, because it's a lot of pressure to to become a monk. A lot of pressure. And it's very intimidating. Even for someone like me, which I have kind of a unique twist where like it might be harder for me in some ways because I have to also get over my ego as being some kind of dropout, simple living person who is monkish. It's like I'm cozying up to it as a monkish person, but and I'm not. And in fact, I remember I was irritated when I heard like Sadhana Forest again in India. They were like, monastics can come here for free, and I'm like, but isn't that what I'm doing? How come I don't get that same like thing? Because I'm living like inspired by Suelo, which is like a monkish whatever. He just was never ordained in an organization. I don't know, like so there's like still like some merit in that analogy or that thinking, but at the same time, I also was not a monk. I didn't go through the ordination and the vows and the sacrifices and the givings up and the plugging in. It's like, and to be a fully ordained monk in most traditions, 5 years. Which I just was talking with Brother Freedom, who left the official umbrella of Deer Park or Plum Village tradition after 14 years. And I was curious because I saw him wearing robes. And I'm like, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to disrobe? But according to him, and this is probably the case I think in a lot of traditions, like just because you leave the monastery or the like umbrella, you're still ordained. It's just further, which I guess I have some more follow-up questions for him about, like, do you still have to hold to your vows then? Like, it's a little confusing to me. But, so it's a 5-year thing. So, and it gets me back to more of the crux of my thing, where it's like, do you want to go, as you are now, Mr. Whitney, launching out into, let's say, the garden? That seems like the best continuation of the free agency with these are your skills and your experiences and da-da-da. Do you want to go there in the spring and, go that route? Or would you rather take the Dharma plunge once and for all? Because part of my thing is I've been flirting with this, kind of cosplaying, reaching. I was talking about this the other day. It's sort of like a, there's a thing in the military circles where it's called stolen valor, where people will wear regalia, even though they may have never served. And I think we see this in the spiritual community too, where people will kind of reach because it carries all that clout and this kind of awe, like, ooh, look at this person in the garb, the holy garb, And there's a reason for it, because, like, you don't just get there overnight, much like the military. It's a process, it's a commitment, And so that garners a certain respect. And what you wear outwardly is very powerful. I mean, I've talked to people over the years, especially when I was at Deer Park, where there's this like thing about the robe. It's like a status thing, you're kind of definitely like, you can get your ego wrapped up into it a little bit, which is not a big reason to do it. There maybe should be some like thing of like wanting to wear it as an honorable thing, because it does convey certain power in a way, or like not power, but when you see a monk walking down the street, or even a few of them, that's a big statement. Like Tai says, you should, if you're a monastic, you should act and walk in such a way that you're giving a Dharma talk, right? And very few people are acting like that, because it's just like there's no concept of showing up as like a figure, because not everyone, but a lot of people just want to blend in, right? And I've always felt like I didn't want to blend in, like I wanted to actually like stand for something and be publicly known for that, where I can't take it off, which is interesting, because actually in the Franciscan tradition, like when they go exercise and other things, they can take off their habit, so they can sort of blend back in when they want to. And there's also a story too from Brother Andre, where a beautiful story where he's wearing his habit quite often when he goes out. And in this town in Arizona, I think in Benson, and all this magical stuff would happen to him when he's wearing this, right? Because like all these people that are believers would come up and he'd bless them, and holy water, and like, I mean, where else can you have that kind of impact on people? That's pretty special, just out and about on the public, on the street. People are seeking you out, and you're there to provide spiritual guidance, comfort, whatever, all the time, just on what you're wearing. Because our clothing is really important in that regard. And the same thing with like a guy in a uniform, a military guy, right? Like, thank you for your service and the whole shebang. It's like, it's a big deal. But part of my thing, I think I've had like a little bit of a stolen dharma, let's call it. Like, it's stolen valor, it's stolen dharma, or whatever, where like I'm trying to reach for that a little bit when it's maybe not fully mine to own. And that was part of my chip on my shoulder when I was at Deer Park, because I felt like I was kind of better, because I was like more pure or something, because I wasn't using money, or I was with Suelo. And I think even maybe Suelo has some of that from just talking with him over the years, where it's like a purity thing, And it's not like we're necessarily wrong, because like the Buddha originally would never charge for the Dharma and stuff. So it's like some of these places that do, it's like, gosh, is that just the sign of the times? Because I think a lot of these folks wouldn't want to either, but they just sort of have to adapt. And I mean, even a Bayagiri, which is donation-based, is still relying on stuff. And they also have like a whole apparatus in the Theravadan tradition that is also supporting them from afar, I believe, So it's not like, if they were their own little entity, right, then it would be different. And that's what's interesting about the Plum Village tradition, is it's its own brand new thing, in a way. There's no like 500-year-old school lineage that's like pumping money into them per se. So they've sort of had to have a kind of paywall, even though there's some softness to it here and there. And they offer things for free, like the Sunday Days of Mindfulness and all the online stuff and the app, and quite a bit is offered. But that's one of my big bugaboos, and it's just like such on my mind. I wish I could just call them right now and be like, can I have a conference call with the senior monastic there and be like, can you guys help me get my head around the money thing? Because it's bugging me so bad. And it bugged me so bad there. In fact, one of my buddies was even like 2 months in. He was like, yeah, I wish they could somehow go more donation based. I was like, I know. Because I don't know where these prices come from. I mean, they got to pay for the food and everything and this and that. But like, I don't understand. I don't know how they get some of these prices, and they're pretty expensive. So, but I don't know all the things. I don't know all the overhead. It's like they got to pay for their fleet of vehicles and the insurance and gas and general maintenance. They got to pay for some staff too. They got to pay for health insurance, which I think might be a real issue, which a big price tag. Because it's not like, because a part of with my free agency, I can be like a little more nimble in a way with that because I just rely on OHP and it's free. And I often thought, why can't they just go with like the free version or whatever? Like they're monastics, for God's sakes. You don't qualify? I have no idea. Like I said. But they also have international people, right? So how do you do that? If you have international people and then U.S. citizens, like they're all on different plans? I don't know. It's like I said, it's more questions I wish I would have asked when I was there. That's part of why prematurely I pulled out. It was a bummer because I think I would have been more inquisitive and like really been searching. But we'll see maybe on this next round. But getting back to the thing of, yeah, it's like, do you want to go as you are with all your wounds and all your skills and just whatever, you're a mixed bag of a person who's not feeling so great, actually, in a lot of ways, right? Pretty shaky ground, depleted. Do you want to go from this point to an intentional community where you're going to be really tried to, show up fully and integrate on the other side of the country with who knows who? Rainbow family kind of can be a little chaotic. Or would you rather ordain and stay in for as long as you are, foreseeably until death, really? Well, this is the other thing I thought too. It's like, there's another element too, which I didn't really even talk about too much with them there at the deer park, but there's this collapse resiliency angle, or lack thereof, where I'm like, how are these institutions really gonna like survive if things get really funky and stuff starts breaking down? And so in my mind, I almost have this sense where it's like in 10 or 20 years, if I ordain and join the Sangha, these places might actually shut down, right? But like I was saying, once you're like past the 5-year mark, you're an official bhikshu or bhikshuni, fully ordained, and like they can't take that away from you. So that was kind of interesting, because I wouldn't necessarily want to go around and, this is what some people do. They kind of go around and they go ordain in different traditions, so you can have like different. Like I'm a Theravadan monk too, and I'm also this. Like, or you see this even within or even there was a guy who was a Catholic priest, and he joined in his 40s probably, and he was in the Plum Village tradition. So like this is uncommon to have different sort of holy degrees or whatever ordinations. But I just feel like, and part of this is what I was, when I was kind of rooting around the Franciscan stuff too, since I've been back, I had this notion where I was like, I feel like I need a little more ripening or polish or like an official stamp or something. Because what I've been doing as this free agent thing, inspired by all these folks, isn't solid enough. Obviously. I mean, if it was solid and skillfully promoting, whatever, it's like I wouldn't necessarily be in this situation where I've been kind of in this doldrum, you know, because it kind of goes back to, even when the pandemic first started, I thought, oh boy, this is going to be stressful, because part of the reason why is my practice, right? Here we get to the crux of it. My practice was weak, and it still is weak. And so that's another thing that, like, maybe more, that could be the defining element of this whole process. It's like, I just need the practice. And of course, you know, the Sangha and everything else that comes with it. But like, the Dharma and the practice, not just meditation, it's the Eightfold Path, mindfulness in general, meditation obviously, but like, if you really stick to that and really anchor into that, amazing things can happen. And that, like I said, going back to my time in Portland, when I was thriving was when I was plugged into that with more focus and intensity. In fact, you know, Touching Her Sangha had planned to like open a little monastery thing or something, like a practice house. It was moving towards more of an official, organized thing, you know. And when I had to leave because my root teacher is pretty toxic, that was, you know, pretty crushing. And this is not uncommon in a lot of spiritual circles, right? Where your teacher like is kind of a jerk, and you can't abide it, so you have to bail out. And I think that hurt Buddhism, that hurt Zen practice, and that hurt my spirituality in some ways, because you sort of like turn away from it a little bit because you're like, oh, this is painful. Like, I don't really want to have anything to do with it because of the association. So that's why it's also really important that you be really mindful about who your spiritual leaders are, because they can ruin it for you. Much like a lot of people growing up in conservative Christianity, you know, that whole faith was ruined for a lot of people because it's just so toxic and othering and homophobic and all this other kind of stuff. But yeah, so like I said, the practice, you know, it's like, bro, be real. Part of your struggle is because your practice is weak, you know, and you haven't had the conditions to really focus in on that. And that's also part of the problem is, I mean, I've always known I'm not great on my own. I'm not like a self-starter, super diligent kind of person. And some people are better at that, you know. Like my buddy Goose, you know, in terms of sitting even, very diligent for many, many years, daily sitting. And part of that is it's a habit energy. You know, you just like, if you don't sit after that long, or like you miss a week or two, then you really notice, you know, the mind start churning up more and you're getting ungrounded and everything else. So that's part of my challenge. And like I said, going back to the start of the pandemic, I was like, uh-oh. Where are your self-care, resiliency practice, mindfulness skills? Like, they're not great. And that first year, you know, was kind of rough. Even though eventually, like, I think I turned back towards it. Because part of that, too, is when I got down here to my dad's place, I was like, okay, what am I doing? Because I was never intending, that's the other crazy thing, I was never intending to stay for as long. You know? I was just going to pop in, support, and then like go to Hawaii or whatever. That was one idea. Or, you know, and then Deer Park came out, and then I had to wait for them to be open again, basically. And that was the Rains Retreat in 2021, in the fall. So, like, leading up to that, I was pretty diligent about hopping back into it. But once again, I'm solo, so, like, how diligent was I? It was a little hit and miss. Like, I wasn't sitting every day, but I was listening to Dharma talks and reading things and trying to cultivate and guard the sense gates more. And that's another crazy thing. Talk about when you don't have a sangha around you, guarding the sense gates is really challenging. And also when you're idle and you have a screen. And because of the pandemic, a lot of people leaned on the screen as their best buddy. Because when stuff shut down and like you live in the Northwest and it's like cold outside and rainy, it's even more doubly so. So, you're going to lean on gaming or whatever, which I had done like violent milsims as not necessarily because I just love them so much, but it was like there was only so much that would really grab me. I'm kind of like spoiled as like a PC gamer elitist or whatever, PC master race as they say. And there was also only so much when I came back from Deer Park, I kind of leaned on that as a bit of a crutch while I was like gearing up to go to the next place. But if you're not guarding the sense gates and you're getting lured back into the violent gaming and everything else, it's a slippery slope, because then it's like, oh, why am I actually looking at or why do I want to watch Band of Brothers again? It's like, oh, as I got into Hell Let Loose, which is a World War II FPS game, and that starts stirring up those seeds, right? We're planting and reaping and sowing and reaping seeds. And that's kind of what's also horrific is for a lot of people, if you think about how you haven't been very vigilant with that over the years of just planting all kinds of unwholesome seeds, especially in terms of media. It's like I've watched The Walking Dead like 2 or 3 times through. Like 10 seasons. I fast forwarded a bunch through some of those viewings, but still, it's like that's really pretty. It's a pretty intense show. And while I like how there's like this cool community aspect and like breakdown of society coming together, it's tons of violence and tons of like very high stress situations, and you're being attacked and chased by zombies, and it's like, and I really think, like I said, I've said this before a few times in some of my other talks and things, our simple monkey brains, we don't know the difference really. We think it's real. On some level, we think it's real. And that's why it really has such an impact on us when we cry and we laugh and we follow these made-up stories like they're real, because we have a hard time really distinguishing between them. And they're also allegorical to real things, which is the other point. But like, True Detective came out, and my sister actually recommended it, the new season of True Detective. And this is something I've watched all 3 seasons, and I thought the first season was like amazing. That was back when I was like super anti-natalist. When I probably took my most like dark turn for like a year or 2, which is another thing that I don't even bring up. But like that's a clear. I kind of got into this weird like, this notion of like nothing matters. You can create your own meaning, but it's sort of nihilistic. I kind of got into that like 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. Which in the last few years I've recorrected quite a bit. And it's like, because there's a danger, especially on social media aspects, where you're just pumping out this kind of nihilistic stuff and this angry stuff. It's like, what do you try? How do you want to show up? Do you want to promote that, or do you want to share David the Gnome memes or Nanoland memes? It's like those are big differences. Or Thich Nhat Hanh teachings. It's like, yeah, it'll pull you out of it if you plant firmly in the Dharma. But yeah, guarding the sense gates, hugely important, and I've been sort of doing better in the last 6 months with that. But like I said, it's kind of spotty because like I'm still pretty idle, and when you're idle, there's only so many things you can do. And I'm not gaming anymore, which is nice. I gave that up in the fall. What made that easier to give up too, because I was getting back to my don't spend money unless absolutely necessary. So that was a subscription service. So that's a good win for me. And I noticed when I give up gaming, every time I would, there's like that wholesome energy would come sprouting up again, because it's like it wasn't just like clobbered. I talk about this in my Beautiful Consciousness Wholesome Harbor thing, where if you're not clobbering that delicate, soft part of yourself, it can actually emerge and blossom, right? So you have to go easy on yourself and don't make it harder, because there's going to be a lot of other elements externally that'll clobber that anyway, like taxes or something, right? Like, or a healthcare system, which is crap, or all these different things. Capitalism is like constantly clobbering every day on so many untold levels that like you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot and just make it worse on yourself. Nutriments, as Thich Naht Hanh would say. What are the nutriments that you're taking in? Because it's crazy. And even like someone like my sister, who is like a full plate, is taking in the nutriment of True Detective about murders, and it's very harsh. It's like you don't need that as like a frontline social worker person. It's just too much. You should just be watching wholesome content if you're going to watch anything. You know, like really. And that's part of my challenge as this like monkish guy, you know, for my family and friends. And I do the same thing with my dad, where I talk to him a lot about the sense gates. And it's like, dude, you're just watching garbage all the time. Just all this violent stuff, just like it's popcorn. You know. And even with speaking to my dad too, what was funny is because of like, I mean, he doesn't really get what I'm doing anyway, but like, there was an element with the monastic path where I was like, if I ordain, he'll finally get it, because it'll be like legitimized. You know, and also not only will it be legitimized, I will transform as well. You know, it'll smooth out my rough spots and I'll get a better handle on my suffering, and like that'll be self-evident. You know. Yeah. So like I said, going forward, it's like, you know, do you want to continue as you have been for the most part, as whatever this is, having that free agency and that autonomy to do so? Or do you just want to join the Sangha body and transform yourself? You know, that's the crux of it. And that's why it's a challenging thing for me, because there's a lot of pressure there. And, you know, like being a free agent, simple living community guy, like there's a lot of options there, right? And I know I can just continue. And I know a lot of my friends that are just doing that in some capacity. But what is the deeper calling? What is the deeper calling? And like I said, if I can get over some of my own hubris and my like, I'm so special, where's my Wikipedia page thing that I had for a while? Because I even thought, if I mentioned this before, but I remember I had a conversation one time on the back of the tea house at Deer Park with somebody. This is like 2 months into it or something. And I was like, I feel like I should have been invited. Which seems a little silly. But like, it's not, to my defense, it's not like a huge reach. What I meant was more of like, I should have been invited as maybe like a Dharma friend or like contributor, given my background. And I'm still on the fence about that. It's like kind of true in some ways, but also kind of overinflated ego and self-concept. Because really, in truth, like, if you take away that I only spent like $2,000 a year for many years, it's like, what did I do that was a hell of a lot different than some of these other simple living people that live in vans or whatever? You know, it's like I wasn't walking on water. I was volunteering. I was living in a community house. You know, it's like, I don't know if that would have warranted such like a invite status kind of thing. You know, and of course part of that is like in terms of like the Dharma specifically. I wasn't like um, fully invested, and so obviously from like the Deer Park lens, it wouldn't really make as much sense. And there's always other factors. It's like, you know, to be invited to a lot of these places or whatever, you have to become known more too. You have to become a bigger public figure. And for whatever reason, I never really blew up. You know, like my ill-fated attempt at having like a Patreon thing take off, and it barely got anywhere. And I was going after it too, doing tons of stuff very diligently for like 2 or 3 years, which is probably why I burned out a little bit. Trying to become like a thing, you know, like I was. That was more back when I was on like the James Aspie public figure, make a splash and gain notoriety. But it's such a funny thing. It's like it takes so much work, and then there's just like luck. You meet the right people, you know, they get your story. Like if Suela had never met Mark Sundin, who wrote a book about him, he might have just continued on like a less notoriable level, you know. And but I used to say sometimes to some of my buddies, I was like, "Where's my parade?" or whatever, and that's like more from the lack of like support, I think, and like, you know, patting myself on the back, or other people patting myself on the back, which I've gotten a lot over the years. It's been very sparse in the last few, but it's like I'm doing something that's kind of hard here, and it's a noble effort, and where is the reward in some capacity? That's what's also been challenging, and part of that ego and the hubris, you know. Like I remember I made a post even where I was like, my uncle moved in and I was freaking out, and I was seeking support from my community that was afar, you know. And I remember I made this line in there where I was like, I didn't like, I didn't give, I wasn't, you know, devoted to service for the last 10 years to not like receive it when I need it. And like, I don't know if that's a little bit of like defeats the purpose. Because if you're going into it thinking that, oh yeah, I'm going to receive it, you know, and it was never like that where I wasn't like, it'll come back to me. But that's just how things work though. Like that's the law of the universe. Like you give and you receive, you know. But the thing is that what tripped me up is thinking that I was like so selfless or whatever, or like some super special thing. And even like I think about like one of my other recent inspirations, like Brother Biagio, who gave up everything. He came from wealth, and he gave everything to live with the houseless folks in Palermo, Italy. And it's like, I'm not Brother Biagio. I'm not. You know? Like that's a whole other level. And even Peace Pilgrim, like I brought up her a lot, and that was like a direct influence on Suelo. It's like Peace Pilgrim, like I don't even, like built different. Truly inspired, sage, saint-like, you know. And in fact, Brother Biagio is going to be a saint. And that's the hard thing to come down to, is like realizing you're actually not a saint, and that's okay. But then how do you show up if you have saintly aspirations or something, some aim of that? It's like if Ty was in the Catholic Church, he'd be on the fast track to sainthood, for example. And I think that's like in his tradition, like a lot of his disciples and his children, basically, his monks and nuns really aspire to that. But they also don't have all the causes and conditions to hold that necessarily, which I think was a concern when he passed, or even when he had a stroke, was like he's such a luminary, much like the Dalai Lama, that like a lot of people come to him, or they come to retreats to just be around him, and like all the other disciples are sort of, it's like dressing on the cake or whatever, but like the main event is this guy who's an enlightened master. He's a master of the Dharma. And that's very compelling. And so people were concerned within the community, I think. And I think there was even a bit of a shakeup, after Ty was like kind of, after he had his stroke and sort of took a step back. And so I still think it's beautiful that like he lives on in people directly, and especially the ones that were around him a lot. You can really see it in their mannerisms and like, and so it'll be interesting to see then going forward is the people that never even met Ty, which is a lot of people actually that are ordaining now because they're younger and they just weren't around, because you would pretty much had to been around in like the early 2000s, because he had a stroke like in 2014 or something. And after that, it was hard to be around him or have access to him. So we're talking a bunch of millennial folks just never met the guy, like myself included. So, but it's still beautiful, like what he put out there and what he laid out and what he created, along with all the other folks over the years. Just that damn paywall. The bugaboo. I don't know. It's like that's part of the hubris, or the part of like not. Well, it's kind of like a little bit of like a getting stuck on that paywall story is like just from all my conditioning coming from like a disciple of Suelo. And from a guy who has said like he's been to some of these different monastery places and they turned him away. And in fact, when I first emailed Plum Village and I told them my whole story, I thought surely like they'll let me go there, like no big deal or whatever. Like they won't, but they're just like, give me a few $1,000s for the rain street. I was like, what? Didn't you hear what I just said? I've been living like Suelo. I don't know. Some places that message goes farther or makes more sense, or I don't know. The other thing is like we all have a footprint in terms of like what we need for our like overhead and care, which is one reason why I've lived simply, is so that I can kind of pay that forward, almost to my own demise, actually, to be frank with you. It's like when I was in Portland, I was like, well, I don't have to charge for anything I'm doing, really. I can ask for donations because I don't have hardly any overhead. And that's part of the problem, I think, when maybe with Deer Park got into, is their overhead has ballooned because of all the things. And maybe like a place like a Bayagiri, it's not as much. And so they a Bayagiri can still maintain themselves by just donations. But I don't know, maybe that'll be a thing that I'll help foster more if I ordain, is like more dana, more donation avenues, or soften that paywall or something. Because it's just like, it's just not accessible to most people. Most people don't have a few $1,000s to pay to go to these retreats. So who goes then? Rich people and their kids. So it's kind of like a pampering of the upper class a little bit. Which part of that though too, and that's another point to even maybe explore, is my disdain for rich people. Because obviously, as this really uber simplistic guy, people that are really caught up in the money, I have some tension with, right? And it's not like they're like bad people, because there's a lot of like professional types that are like helping. But then there are also people that are, in my view, doing these jobs that aren't very beneficial. They're just like tech people or something. And it's like they're not any less deserving of the Dharma or compassion, but it's not really like very inspiring. And that was one of my issues too when I was there. I just was like around kind of upper middle, or not upper middle class, but upper class people that were coming often in like these 1 and 2 week stays. And like, I don't know, there's good people, but I don't know. I just this is part of the problem. Is like this is part of the problem with the genie analogy. Is like I've already kind of gone so far in radicalization with like rainbow family stuff and anarchist things and whatever and anti-capitalism, blah blah blah. Is that it's hard for me to like put that back.